Here's another one in this series about the Civil War. And like I said, the more you read, the more you learn, the more you dive into this hole, the more you see the other side and how history is written. History is always written by the victors, and the losing side gets the shaft. So, and they have been saying this about Northern aggression and about the North and the South, about who started what and all that kind of stuff. And basically, it gets mythologized. And I'm not taking either side. I'm trying to get at the truth. I feel some sort of way about slavery because that is the history of my people. So I feel some sort of way. But the thing is, even with that, even if I feel some sort of way, the truth is the truth. Not how it's interpreted, not how you feel about it, not what people believe or want to believe. What is the actual truth? And let that sit. And sometimes the truth is good, and sometimes it's horrible. Most times it's horrible. Most time these things get worked out because of people's base natures. Most times. But this is from Mises Institute, which is von Mises. This is the Austrian School of Economics. This is their, how can I say, their blog or their website. This is what they produce. So this is the things that they produce as far as papers and stuff like that. And I learned about the Mises Institute through Craig Hewlett. And they are pretty good about talking about economics and the difference between economics and stuff like that. So they are reputable, especially if you're in the Austrian school. And a lot of your Austrian school economics is actually in the University of Chicago. So not a lot of your neoliberal economics are actually partially Austrian school. Anyhow, continuing. Demolishing the Lincoln myth yet again, Mises Institute, right? And I don't quite know who the author is. Okay, maybe we'll find out at the end. Espanol. Okay, I think it's in Espanol, in Spanish. The problem with Lincoln is the culmination of D. Lorenzo's many years of research on Abraham Lincoln. It is a masterly summing and extension of his earlier classics, The Real Lincoln and The Lincoln Unmasked. I actually read The Real Lincoln. Go ahead and get a pen. There you go. I actually read The Real Lincoln. I haven't read The Lincoln Unmasked. I might read that one. De Lorenzo is both a historian and an economist with an expert knowledge of Austrian economics and also of the public choice school. This background enables him to grasp what most other historians of the Civil War period miss: the centralizing economic plan behind Lincoln's policies. Even now, we got 2 wars going on. At the bottom of all of these wars is economics, is money. De Lorenzo calls attention to a vital fact that demolishes the mythological view that Lincoln's primary motive for opposing secession in 1861 was his distaste for slavery. Whether you agree with me or not, agree with him or not, right, you have to look at the facts and make up your own mind. Precisely the opposite is true. It is well known that in an effort to promote compromise, a constitutional amendment was proposed in Congress that forever forbade interference with slavery in states where it already existed. That is the compromise. So we know from the last paper, right? We knew what that amendment was, right? The Corn Amendment, right? Lincoln referred to this proposal, the Corn Amendment, in his first inaugural stating that he was not opposed to the amendment, since it merely made explicit the existing constitutional arrangement regarding slavery. In other words, there was already an arrangement, okay? Ick. Of course, Lincoln was not telling the truth. Nothing in the Constitution prior to the Corwin Amendment prohibited amendments to end slavery. So this new proposal did not just make the existing constitutional arraignment explicit. Readers can judge the Corwin Amendment for themselves in a helpful set of original documents that our author includes in the book. The Corwin Amendment on page 2217. So much is well established, but De Lorenzo adds a surprising touch. Far from viewing the Corwin Amendment with grudging consent, Lincoln was was in fact behind the scenes promoter. Read that again. Far from viewing the Corwin Amendment with grudging consent, Lincoln was in fact its behind the scenes promoter. Okay. It was Lincoln himself who had instructed his soon to be Secretary of State, William Seward, to suggest three resolutions, the import of the first of which was identical to that of the Corwin Amendment, to the Committee of 13 in the U.S. Senate without indicating they issued from Springfield, that is, from Lincoln himself. Extension of slavery in the territories was for Lincoln an entirely different matter, and on this issue he refused all compromise. Here we confront a paradox. If Lincoln thought it was more important to preserve the Union than to oppose slavery, why was he willing to compromise over slavery in the territories? If he thought slavery's extension was too high a price to pay to preserve the Union, why was he willing to permanently entrench slavery wherever it already existed? It is hard to detect a moral difference between slavery in the states and the territories. De Lorenzo readily resolves this paradox. Lincoln opposed extension of slavery because this would interfere with the prospects of white workers. Like I said, I always said it comes down to money, right? Lincoln, following his mentor Henry Clay, favored a nationalist economic program of which high tariffs, a national bank, and governmental finance internal improvements were key elements. This program, he thought, would promote not only the interests of the wealthy industrial and financial powers that he always faithfully served, but would benefit white labor as well. Blacks, in his opinion, would be better off outside the United States. He always believed that. And throughout his life, Lincoln supported schemes for repatriation of blacks to Africa and elsewhere. And he sure did. If blacks left the country, they could not compete with whites, the primary objects of Lincoln's concern. Lincoln, by the way, did not see this program as in any way in contradiction to his professed belief that all men were created equal. Blacks, he thought, had human rights but not political rights. Interesting. Got to remember, Lincoln, if Lincoln had lived, Lincoln would have shipped all the black people outside the country if he had lived. That's probably why he was assassinated, is because if you sent all the black people out of the country, especially in the South, the United States economy probably would have collapsed, in my opinion. Okay. In order to finance his economic program, high tariffs were essential. In his first inaugural address, Lincoln threw down the gauntlet of war over tax collection. He reassured the country that there needs to be no bloodshed or violence, and there shall be none, unless it be forced upon the national authority. De Lorenzo is appropriately scathing about Lincoln's remarks. The myth of the sacred union bound together by the mystic cords of memory was invented to provide cover for Lincoln's cold-hearted willingness to wage total war on his own country for tax revenue. There was no talk of force of any kind when the subject was slavery, except for forcing runaway slaves back into slavery by enforcing the Fugitive Slave Act. Tax collection, on the other hand, called for threats of total war on the entire population of the South, threats that were carried out a few months later, leading to as many as 750,000 American deaths. This is from DiLorenzo. DiLorenzo was fully prepared for the objection that even if the Southern states had ample reason to oppose Lincoln's economic plans, they had no legal right to secede. In this view, Lincoln had a constitutional duty to preserve the Union by any means necessary. The historian Allen Welslow claims that the Southern secessionists were guilty of treason by their efforts to leave the Union. In what, to my mind, is the highlight of the book, DiLorenzo turns the tables on those who charged the Southern states with treason. The United States was a compact of sovereign states. That is true. And a state that no longer wished to remain part of the Union was free to leave. So they thought. Well, and Andrew Jackson didn't think so either. So I don't know about that. This view of the matter was not dreamed up by Southern firebrands in 1860. It had behind it the weighty authority of Thomas Jefferson. On August 12, 1803, letter to John C. Breckinridge of Kentucky, who had inquired about the secession movement that was gaining prominence in New England at the time, Jefferson wrote that if there is to be a separation, then God bless them both, that is, both regions of the Union that were at odds, and keep them in the Union if it be for their good, but separate them if it be better. If one accepts Jefferson's approach, Lincoln's nationalist understanding of the United States was, as Murray Rothbard would say, monstrous, as DiLorenzo writes. Lincoln justified the military invasion of his own country and the mass killing of fellow American citizens by the hundreds of thousands with a theory that the people of the free and independent states, as they are called in the Declaration of Independence, were not sovereign, that the Union, which is to say federal government, was the real sovereign, and that the federal government was therefore supreme, that the Union was not voluntary, and that no state had a right to secede from it. The theory that the Union of States is older than the states themselves. Interesting. Makes about as much sense as the theory that a marital union can be older than either spouse, in which case they would have been married before they were born. No state would have ever ratified the Constitution if this, Lincoln's theory of the more perfect union, was what the founding generation thought the document said. With a brilliant stroke, DiLorenzo reverses the verdict that leaving the Union was treason and Lincoln was the real traitor. Lincoln's invasion of the Southern states was the definition of treason in Article 3, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution, which defines treason as only in levying war upon them or adhering to enemies, giving them aid and comfort. The them and their in this definition of treason refer to the United States, which are always in the plural in the founding documents, denoting that the individual, free and independent states were uniting by a compact among them, not irrevocably surrendering their sovereign and their very existence in favor of a sacred, perpetual, inescapable union. This even comes up today. Once Lincoln invaded the South, he and his henchmen carried on the war with great brutality. Murray Rothbard says that the Lincoln conduct of the war broke the 19th century rules of war by specifically plundering and slaughtering civilians. Sounds a lot like what's going on in Gaza right now. Destroying civilian life and institutions as to reduce the South to submission. Sherman's infamous march through Georgia was one of the great war crimes and crimes against humanity of the past century and a half, because by targeting and butchering civilians, Lincoln and Grant and Sherman paved the way for all genocidal horrors of the monstrous 20th century. DiLorenzo confronts an important objection to his main argument. Even if Lincoln didn't start the war to free the slaves, but rather to create a powerful central state. Wasn't war still necessary to end slavery? This seems unlikely. In an appearance on Bill Maher's television program, Ron Paul responded to Maher by pointing out that all other countries in the world that ended slavery in the 19th century did so peacefully, without a civil war, specifically citing how the British used tax dollars to buy the freedom of slaves and then ended slavery legally through the British Empire. Then DeLorenzo's forthright analysis of Lincoln's stands in marked contrast to a leading member of what our author, following the usage of Lerone Bennett Jr., calls the Logos School, which treats Lincoln's words as gospel. An example of this would be a statement by Lincoln scholar Harry Jaffa when DeLorenzo, debated him at the Independent Institute in Oakland, California in 2003. During the question and answer session, an audience member, apparently a Jaffa protege, asked Jaffa if he thought Lincoln's speeches were the words of God. Jaffa responded that yes, he thought they were. Readers of The Problem with Lincoln will be forever immune to this idolatrous nonsense. And that is the end of that. Now, I've read one of DeLorenzo's book. I don't think I've read this one. I don't know which one this one is.